The world had changed. Silence ruled now, not the peaceful kind, but the eerie quiet that followed screams too long sustained. Cities once lit with life flickered in darkness, their buildings crumbling into gray husks, overrun by vines and death. Nathan crept through the hollowed remains of what used to be a maternity ward, his boots crunching broken glass with each step. A faint buzzing of flies echoed through the corridors, but he paid it no mind. In his arms, wrapped in layers of stained blankets, lay his newborn child, a small, fragile creature breathing the heavy air of a world that no longer deserved innocence. The baby stirred, its soft cry slicing through the silence. Nathan shushed gently, fingers trembling, not with fear, but exhaustion. For the last 5 hours, he'd fought off 3 roamers, dodged a collapsing stairwell, and delivered his child, all without assistance. But the hardest part hadn't even begun yet. His wife, Mara, was lying just a few feet behind him, still, quiet, and not quite human. Not anymore. He glanced at her, his heart clenching. Her skin, once glowing with warmth, now shimmered in a strange gray hue, and faint black veins crept up her neck like twisted vines. Her eyes, however, her eyes still held him. Half zombie or not, they were still her. The virus had stopped halfway, or maybe she had fought it with the same stubborn spirit that once drove her to argue with him about everything from laundry to apocalypse plans. It didn't matter how or why, she was still conscious, still herself. But for how long? Mara opened her eyes slowly, her voice gravelly. "The baby, is he okay?" Nathan nodded, kneeling beside her. "He's strong. Quiet, for now." She smiled, but it didn't reach her sunken cheeks. Her fingertips twitched. He saw the hunger hiding behind her eyes, the itch of the virus, and it terrified him. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's pulling. Like something inside is trying to crawl out." Nathan looked away, his jaw clenched. He didn't have the answers. All he had were promises. One of them was, "I'll never leave you." And yet, they had heard rumors. Of others like her, partials, as some survivors called them. Infected but lucid. Neither dead nor fully living. Sometimes they lasted weeks. Sometimes only hours. Nathan had made a choice when Mara was bitten, to trust her. To believe in the impossible. That somewhere inside the infected shell, his wife still remained. Now, with their child in his arms, that decision carried weight. Immense, terrifying weight. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoed through the corridor. Nathan tensed and reached for the rusted crowbar strapped to his back. Mara tried to sit up but winced, her body protesting. 3 shadows appeared at the far end of the hallway, emerging from the misty corridor like ghosts. Survivors. Armed. Eyes scanning. One of them spotted Nathan and raised a hand, not in greeting, but to halt the others. "Don't move," a woman's voice commanded. "Hands up." "Now." Nathan slowly stood, one hand raised, the other cradling the baby. "We don't want trouble," he said calmly. "Just needed shelter for the night." The woman stepped forward. Her rifle stayed aimed. "You alone?" Nathan hesitated. The baby squirmed. Behind him, Mara coughed, a wet, unnatural sound. The leader's eyes narrowed. "Who's there with you?" Nathan didn't answer. One of the men stepped around, spotting Mara on the floor. He raised his gun. "She's infected." "Wait!" Nathan shouted. "She's not like the others. She's still conscious, she hasn't turned." "She's a risk," the woman replied coldly. "You want to save your kid? Walk away now." Mara met Nathan's eyes. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. His grip on the crowbar tightened. "She's my wife," he said quietly. The air grew still. Then, a scream from the far end of the corridor. Not from a human throat. Roamers. 5 of them. Fast ones. The survivors spun around. Gunshots rang out. Nathan ducked, shielding the baby. He glanced at Mara, who was struggling to rise. "Leave me," she rasped. "You have to get him out." "I'm not leaving you," he growled, gripping her arm. The hall exploded into chaos. Bullets flew. Roamers lunged. A man's scream was cut short. Nathan grabbed Mara with one hand, held the baby with the other, and ran into the shadows. Behind them, the world collapsed in fire and blood. Ahead of them, the unknown waited. But together, they ran. The night felt endless. Shadows stretched across the decimated landscape as Nathan stumbled through the broken streets, Mara close behind, her feet dragging. His heart raced with every step, not from the fear of the undead, but from the weight of the decisions that had led them here. The baby's soft cries continued to haunt him, reminding him of the responsibility he carried, the fragile thread that held their lives together. Mara's movements were slow, deliberate, almost graceful for someone so close to the edge of the world's collapse. Yet, Nathan could see it in her eyes. That predatory gleam. That pull of the infection clawing at her humanity. They had made it out of the hospital, but it had come at a cost. The survivors, the ones with weapons, hadn't followed them, at least not yet. The moment the gunfire had started, the decision to flee had been made for them. The sound of Romer's shrieks had drowned out everything else, and in the confusion, they had managed to slip away. But now, they were in the middle of a dead city, no supplies, no plan. Just a hope that somehow, somewhere, they could find refuge. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said," Mara whispered, her voice barely above the wind. Nathan kept his eyes ahead, scanning the street for any sign of danger. He didn't need to ask what she meant. It was always the same. That fragile hope they both clung to, that they could somehow beat the infection. "You can't keep fighting it forever," he said, his voice flat, though it cracked in places. "The virus is relentless, Mara. You felt it, I know you have." She paused, the moonlight casting a pale glow across her ashen face. "I've been fighting it since the bite. I won't stop until I can anymore." Nathan's heart twisted at her words. He had seen it before. The slow decay of those who held on too tightly. It was a battle, one that they couldn't win. "There's a place," he said, pushing through his own doubts. "A safe place. They call it the Zone of Echoes." Mara looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Echoes?" "Yeah." Nathan nodded. "It's a settlement, far from here. Some people believe it's a refuge for those, like you." Half-turned. "You think they'll let me in?" The question hung in the air, thick with the weight of fear and hope. Nathan took a deep breath. "I don't know. But it's our best shot." They moved forward again, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the heavy darkness around them. The city felt deserted, the once bustling streets now only occupied by the occasional roamer, aimlessly searching for its next victim. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and Nathan could taste the bitterness of the world's collapse on his tongue. Suddenly, a low growl broke the silence. Nathan froze. Mara stopped too, her head tilting slightly, her nostrils flaring. The change was instant. The virus, deep within her veins, sharpened her senses. The air was full of the scent of blood, the unmistakable stench of the dead. Nathan's grip on the baby tightened as he stepped in front of her. "We have to move," he said urgently. "Now." But it was too late. From the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, slow, stumbling, but unmistakable. A roamer. And more followed, spilling out from the alleyways like rats from a broken sewer. Their eyes were lifeless, their movements jerky, predatory. Nathan turned to Mara. "Stay close. Don't let them get too close." She nodded, her hand clutching the old hunting knife he'd given her earlier, the one she had been holding onto since the first wave of infection had hit. Her grip was firm, but Nathan knew it wasn't enough. No weapon ever would be. The first roamer lunged at them. Nathan swung the crowbar, connecting with a sickening thud. The creature's head cracked, but it didn't stop. It stumbled back, hissing, and lunged again. Nathan hit it again, harder this time, but the thing was relentless. More were coming, their growls growing louder. "Go!" Nathan shouted at Mara. Mara's eyes flashed with something dangerous, something primal. The infection inside her was stirring, urging her to give in, to tear and kill. But she fought it. For now. With a roar, she charged into the fray, her knife flashing through the air. Nathan was beside her in an instant, swinging the crowbar at the next roamer. The sound of metal on bone echoed through the streets. But the roamer didn't fall. Instead, it sank its teeth into Mara's arm. Her gasp of pain cut through the night, sharp and primal. "Mara!" Nathan screamed, grabbing her with one arm and slamming the crowbar into the creature's skull. She crumpled to her knees, the infection inside her raging, burning hot. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice strained, "it's too much." His heart froze. And in that moment, he realized that the zone of echoes might be the only thing left that could save them. But would it? Would it save her? Mara's breath was ragged, her pulse quickening in a way that felt unnatural, even for someone infected. Nathan kept his arms around her, his mind racing, his body working on autopilot as he fought back the rising panic in his chest. The roamer's bite hadn't just pierced her skin, it had injected more of the virus into her, pushing her to the brink. He could feel the shift inside her, the violent pull of the infection calling out to her. It was an undeniable force, one that clawed at her very essence, trying to devour everything that remained human. Nathan's fingers tightened on her shoulder. "Mara, stay with me. Just stay with me." She looked up at him, her face pale, her features twisted by the pain. Her once warm eyes had grown distant, fogged with the growing influence of the virus. I'm not sure I can, Nathan," she whispered hoarsely. "I can feel it, inside me." His heart thudded painfully in his chest. "No. You can. You have to." Her hand reached out, trembling, touching the baby's blanket. Her fingers grazed the soft fabric as though she were trying to remind herself of something real. "I can't be the mother. I can't be what he needs me to be." Nathan shook his head, a fierce resolve settling over him. "You are. You always will be." A distant growl pulled him from the moment. His head snapped to the side, and he saw them, more roamers. At least 3, shambling toward them from the alleyway. Their eyes locked onto Nathan and Mara, and the hunger in their gaze was enough to send a chill down his spine. "Get up," Nathan urged, his voice sharp with urgency. "We have to move. We can't stay here." Mara struggled to her feet, swaying on unsteady legs. She was fading, her body betraying her, the infection working its way deeper into her. But she was still with him. And for the first time in days, Nathan realized that time wasn't just a ticking clock, it was their most precious resource. He had to get them to the zone of echoes, no matter the cost. "Come on," he said, gripping her hand tightly. "We're getting out of here." The baby whimpered in Nathan's arms, sensing the tension in the air. As if on cue, the baby's cries grew louder, the sound cutting through the night and pulling Nathan's attention for just a split second. That was enough. One of the roamers lunged. The creature was fast, its jaws snapping just inches from Mara's neck. Nathan swung the crowbar with all his strength, connecting with the roamer's head and sending it crashing to the ground. But it wasn't enough. More were coming. Mara moved on her own now, her eyes filled with that same primal hunger. She threw herself into the next roamer, knocking it back with a ferocity that surprised Nathan. The knife she carried had a deadly precision as she plunged it into the creature's chest. But with every moment, she seemed to slip further away from herself, her humanity bleeding out with each strike. Nathan's heart tightened. The woman he loved was slipping away. But he couldn't let her go. Not yet. "Stay with me, Mara." Nathan cried out. His voice cracked, desperate. "We'll get there, I promise. We'll find the zone of echoes. Just hold on." Her breath was shallow now, her movements more sluggish. She looked at him, her gaze distant. I don't know if I can fight it anymore, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's too strong. Too powerful. He shook his head, his grip tightening around her. You can. We'll make it through this. Together. Mara's lips curled into a faint smile, though it was more of a grimace than anything else. Together, she repeated softly. But I'm not sure how much longer I can be with you. The words hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. How much longer? It was the truth they had both been avoiding, the harsh reality that had been looming over them ever since Mara had been bitten. He had tried to block it out, to convince himself that he could save her. But as the virus spread through her veins, it was becoming harder to ignore the inevitable. He had to move faster. The zone of echoes was their only hope, their only chance. But how much longer could Mara hold on? How much longer could she keep herself from slipping completely into the undead? Mara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I won't give up on you. We're getting to that place. No matter what. She nodded weakly, her fingers twitching as she tried to squeeze his hand. I know. I know. Suddenly, another roar echoed in the distance. A group of roamers was approaching. More than he could fight off alone. And with Mara in her current state, the odds were against them. He couldn't keep fighting this battle forever. But he would. For as long as he could. Come on, he said through gritted teeth. We have to move now. With renewed urgency, Nathan grabbed Mara and pushed her forward, all while keeping the baby close. They had no choice. The zone of echoes was the only place where they might find salvation. Or at least, the chance for survival. But as the night grew darker, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that they might be too late. The journey to the zone of echoes had become a grueling test of endurance. Each step was slower than the last, each breath more labored. Nathan could see it in Mara's eyes, the infection was winning. She fought it every moment, but it was a losing battle. Her once vibrant eyes were now clouded with the sickness, the human spark fading away. They had traveled for hours, trudging through desolate streets where every corner hid new dangers. The world was a broken shadow of what it had once been, a place where the living were outnumbered by the dead. Yet, the promise of the zone of echoes kept them moving forward. It was their only hope, and Nathan refused to let go of that hope. The city around them was eerily silent, except for the occasional growl of a roamer in the distance. It felt like they were the last living beings in a place that had long since fallen silent. The once bustling streets were now a graveyard, littered with debris, overturned cars, and the remains of those who hadn't been fast enough to escape. Mara leaned heavily against Nathan, her steps faltering more with each passing minute. Nathan's heart ached for her. The woman he loved was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He had promised her that he would save her, but every promise he made felt emptier than the last. Just a little farther, he whispered, his voice filled with the urgency that had taken root in his chest. He didn't know if he was convincing her or himself, but he couldn't afford to think about that. Not now. Not when they were so close. Mara's breathing was shallow, labored, her grip on his arm weak. Nathan, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. Are we really going to make it? To the zone of echoes? Her words were a dagger to his heart. He had promised her that they would make it. He had convinced her that there was hope. But now, even his own doubt was creeping in. The zone of echoes wasn't just a place, it was a story, a legend, a whisper of safety in a world that had no room for it. How could he promise her something that might not even exist? We will, Nathan replied, trying to steady his voice. We'll get there. I swear. But Mara's eyes had lost that spark of belief, the one that had once held her through the worst of the apocalypse. She had been fighting for so long, holding on for so many months. And now, it was starting to feel like the fight was over. She was fading. Suddenly, a movement in the shadows caught his attention. A low growl echoed through the air, and Nathan spun, instinctively reaching for his crowbar. His heart pounded in his chest as his eyes scanned the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not a roamer, but a person, a survivor. Nathan tensed, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of suspicion and relief. There were few left in the world, and fewer still who didn't want to see them dead. The man before them was tall, dressed in a makeshift armor of scraps and patches, his face half hidden by a bandana. He held a rifle loosely in his hands, but his eyes were alert, scanning the surroundings. "I could ask you the same thing," the man replied, his voice rough. "I don't know if I should be worried or relieved, but I'm not looking for trouble. Just looking to survive." Nathan's guard remained up, but his curiosity got the better of him. "We're looking for the Zone of Echoes," he said, his voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "Is it real? Does it exist?" The man's eyes flickered for a moment, and for a brief instant, Nathan thought he saw something dark and calculating behind them. But it was gone in a flash, replaced by a nonchalant shrug. "Real enough," the man said. "But don't expect miracles. The place is complicated." Nathan narrowed his eyes. "Complicated? How?" The man let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "The Zone of Echoes isn't just a place for people to hide out. There's a cost to it. A price you might not be willing to pay." Mara stirred next to Nathan, her grip on him weakening further. She murmured, almost to herself, "A price." The man's gaze shifted to her, and his eyes lingered for a moment, sharp and calculating. "Yeah. A price. Most of the people who go there don't come back the same. And some of them, they never come back at all." Nathan took a step forward, his patience fraying. "What do you mean? What's the catch?" The man looked him over, sizing him up. "It's not just a sanctuary. It's a place where you can become something else. Where you can take your chance at a new life, but at the cost of your old one." The words hung in the air like a poison, seeping into Nathan's thoughts. What kind of place was the Zone of Echoes, really? Was it a sanctuary, or was it just another cruel illusion in a world that had no mercy? And what if Mara, his wife, wasn't the one who needed saving? The man's words echoed in Nathan's mind long after the encounter had ended. The Zone of Echoes, a place that promised safety, but at what cost? Nathan had no choice but to keep moving forward. He had to believe there was something waiting for them, something worth risking everything for. But the doubt gnawed at him. What if this was just another lie? Another false hope in a world that had turned its back on everything good? Mara's condition was worsening. She could barely keep her eyes open now, her once vibrant skin growing pale, her limbs trembling with the strain of trying to hold on. Nathan had to keep her moving, had to push forward for the sake of the baby, for the sake of their future. But the closer they got to the Zone of Echoes, the more Nathan felt like he was heading into the unknown, into a place that might very well destroy them both. He glanced at the man who had given them the cryptic warning. The stranger had left just as quickly as he had appeared, disappearing back into the shadows of the ruined city. Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way the man had looked at Mara, the way he had said most people don't come back the same, it had been a warning. And yet, Nathan couldn't turn back now. Not when they were so close. "Hold on, Mara," Nathan murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he helped her take another shaky step. "We're almost there. I promise. Just a little longer." Mara barely responded, her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. The baby stirred in Nathan's arms, a soft cry that seemed almost too loud in the heavy silence that surrounded them. Nathan's grip on the baby tightened instinctively. If he lost them both, he didn't know how he would survive. As they reached the outskirts of the Zone of Echoes, the air shifted. It wasn't a physical change, but a palpable one. It was as though they had crossed an invisible line, a boundary that marked the beginning of something new, something dangerous. The land before them was eerily quiet. The city's chaos seemed distant, muffled. The usual sounds of the undead, the growls, the scraping of their decaying limbs, were gone. It was too quiet. Nathan stopped at the edge of the clearing, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but this wasn't it. The Zone of Echoes didn't look like a sanctuary, it looked like a ghost town. A few crumbling buildings stood in the distance, their windows shattered, their doors wide open as though inviting them in. But there were no signs of life. No survivors, no signs of hope. This isn't right, Nathan whispered, the fear creeping into his voice. Mara shifted in his arms, her hand weakly gripping his sleeve. We have to go in, Nathan. We don't have much time. Her words sent a cold shiver down his spine. How long did they really have? How much longer before Mara completely succumbed to the infection? And if they entered the zone of echoes, what would happen to them there? Nathan stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the empty streets. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Without warning, a figure appeared from the shadows, tall, gaunt, dressed in tattered clothing. The figure moved slowly toward them, its steps deliberate and measured. Nathan tensed, his grip on the crowbar tightening. The figure stopped a few feet away, its face hidden by a dark hood. A raspy voice called out from the shadows. Looking for the zone of echoes? Nathan nodded, his pulse quickening. Yes. We've come for safety. For the cure. The figure tilted its head, a low chuckle escaping from under the hood. You're too late. What do you mean? Nathan's voice was strained, his hope faltering. The figure stepped closer, revealing a face that was both familiar and unrecognizable. It was a man, but his eyes were empty, his skin pale, as though the infection had claimed his humanity long ago. Once, this place was a sanctuary, the man said, his voice rasping like gravel. But now it's a prison. The cure, it doesn't exist. Only more death. Nathan's mind spun. He couldn't comprehend what the man was saying. The zone of echoes was supposed to be their salvation. But it was clear now that they had been lied to. The place they had sought for so long wasn't a refuge, it was a trap. Mara stirred again, her breath shallow, and Nathan glanced at her in a panic. She was fading faster now, her skin growing colder. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. Is there any way to save her? Nathan asked urgently. Tell me. Is there any way to save her? The man's eyes flickered with something resembling pity, but it was fleeting. He stepped forward, his gaze landing on Mara. You can't save her, he whispered. She's already gone. The infection, it takes everything. You can only watch as it consumes them. Nathan's heart shattered. The truth was staring him in the face, and yet he couldn't bring himself to believe it. There had to be another way. There had to be something he could do. But as the man turned away, disappearing back into the shadows, Nathan realized that he had been chasing a dream that was now shattered, just like everything else in this broken world. Nathan stood frozen, staring at the empty space where the man had disappeared into the shadows. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and despair. The zone of echoes, the last hope he had clung to for so long, was nothing more than a cruel joke. There was no cure. No salvation. And Mara, his wife, the love of his life, was slipping further away from him with every passing second. Mara's weak breath was a constant reminder of how little time they had left. Her once human eyes, now clouded with the infection, flickered up at him. The dim spark of recognition that had remained in her gaze was fading. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely a rasp. Her words broke Nathan's heart. She hadn't spoken much since they entered the zone, and now, it seemed as though she knew what was happening. She was starting to understand that she was losing the fight. No, Nathan said desperately, his voice shaking. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he brushed the damp strands of hair from her face. Mara, you're going to make it. We're going to find a way. I won't give up on you. She smiled weakly, but there was no joy in it. It was a smile full of pain, full of acceptance. I don't want you to see me like this, she murmured. I don't want you to remember me this way. Nathan's heart clenched. She was so much more than this. She was the woman who had stood by his side when the world had gone mad. She was the one who had laughed, cried, and fought beside him. How could he let this be the end of her story? I don't care how you look, Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're still the woman I love. That hasn't changed." But Mara's eyes flickered again, the last vestiges of her humanity slipping away. Her hands gripped his arm, almost as if she were holding onto him one last time. "Please," she whispered. "Promise me something." "What?" Nathan asked, leaning in close. Promise me you'll keep him safe," she said, her voice breaking. Nathan felt the weight of her words hit him hard. "The baby. Their baby." "I promise," he whispered, his voice trembling. Mara let out a soft sigh, and for a moment, Nathan thought she had fallen asleep. But when she spoke again, her voice was faint, as if it were coming from a great distance. "I love you," she said, barely audible. "I love you too," Nathan replied, his voice cracking. His tears fell freely now, unbidden. The woman he had fought for, the woman he had loved, was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Mara's body relaxed in his arms, and for a fleeting moment, Nathan thought she was gone. But then, a slow, agonizing shudder ran through her, and her eyes snapped open. The infection had claimed her completely. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her hand shot out to grab Nathan by the shirt, her grip cold and unyielding. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as he looked down at her. This wasn't his wife anymore. This was something else, something monstrous. "Get away from me!" Nathan shouted, recoiling as she let out a low, guttural growl. But it was too late. The transformation had already begun. Mara's face contorted, her features twisting as the infection took over completely. Her once beautiful eyes turned milky, devoid of the life that had once been there. Her skin, once soft and warm, now felt cold and clammy beneath his touch. In that moment, Nathan realized the truth: he had lost her. Not just physically, but emotionally, too. His wife was gone, replaced by a creature driven by hunger and primal instincts. A creature that would never be the woman he had known. For a brief moment, Nathan stood there, paralyzed by the horror of what had just happened. His mind screamed at him to run, to save himself and the baby. But his heart wouldn't let him. He couldn't leave Mara, even if she was no longer the woman he loved. With a guttural cry, he pulled away from her grasp, stumbling back as Mara tried to lunge at him. The infection had taken its full toll. She was no longer capable of coherent thought. She was nothing but a mindless, ravenous shell of the person she had once been. Nathan's thoughts raced. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it fast. He couldn't keep holding on to the past. He couldn't keep living in the illusion that there was a cure, that there was hope. The zone of echoes had failed them. And Mara had failed him, too, in a way he couldn't bear to comprehend. With his heart heavy, Nathan turned his back on the half-human shell of his wife, taking the baby in his arms as he began to walk away. The zone of echoes was now just a memory, a place that had promised salvation but delivered nothing but despair. As he moved further into the heart of the zone, Nathan realized that the real test had just begun. He had to survive. He had to protect his child. Because there was no one left who could. Nathan walked through the desolate streets of the zone of echoes, his grip tight on the baby, his mind a constant whirlwind of grief and disbelief. The last remnants of the world he once knew seemed to fade with every step. The place that had promised safety, solace, and salvation had only given him a cruel reality, a world that was no longer recognizable, no longer worth saving. With every passing hour, the memory of Mara, of the woman she had been, weighed heavier on him. Her smile, her touch, the soft laughter they once shared in the days before the world fell apart, all of it felt like a distant dream. And now, all that was left was the hollow shell of a creature that had once been his wife. The baby stirred in his arms, a soft cry breaking the silence that surrounded them. Nathan looked down at the tiny bundle, a mixture of hope and terror filling his heart. His child, the last piece of the family he had once had. The only thing that mattered now was keeping the baby safe, protecting it from the horrors of this new world. But even as Nathan looked down at his child, the weight of the world pressed in on him. How long could he survive like this? How long could he keep going, knowing that every step he took brought him closer to an uncertain future. The world outside was a battlefield, and there was no place for weakness. The baby's cries seemed to grow louder, more desperate, and Nathan quickened his pace. He couldn't afford to break down now. Not when the stakes were this high. But even in his urgency, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He had crossed into the heart of the zone of echoes, and now the silence that enveloped him felt more like an oppressive force than a refuge. The empty streets, the ruined buildings, all of it seemed to be closing in on him. He had no idea where to go next. His only goal now was survival for himself, for the baby. Everything else was secondary. But as the baby's cries continued, the feeling of being watched only intensified. It was as though the shadows themselves were alive, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind one of the dilapidated buildings. The man was tall, his face obscured by a hood, but Nathan could see the glint of metal in his hands. Another survivor, Nathan thought, but something about this man seemed different. There was a coldness to him, an emptiness that made Nathan's blood run cold. The stranger didn't speak at first, just stared at Nathan with a look that was both calculating and dangerous. Nathan instinctively took a step back, his hand tightening around the baby as though it were a lifeline. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. "Who are you?" Nathan demanded, his voice hoarse. His eyes scanned the area, looking for any sign of a threat. The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly raised the weapon in his hand, a crude, jagged knife that looked like it had been fashioned from scrap metal. The blade gleamed ominously in the dim light. "Do you know what it's like to live in this world?" the stranger asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Do you know what it takes to survive?" Nathan's heart raced. He couldn't let his guard down. He couldn't afford to let anyone, no matter how desperate, get too close. "I know enough," Nathan said, his voice steady, though his nerves were beginning to fray. "I don't want any trouble. Just leave us alone." The stranger tilted his head, his expression unreadable beneath the hood. "Trouble? Trouble is what this world is made of," he said with a soft laugh. "You're here, aren't you? You've crossed into the zone of echoes, looking for answers, looking for something that doesn't exist. But the truth is, the world's gone to hell, and no one is safe. Not anymore." Nathan's grip on the baby tightened, his mind racing. The zone of echoes was supposed to be a place of refuge, a sanctuary for survivors. But now, he was beginning to wonder if the man's words were true. Maybe the zone had never been what he thought it was. "I don't have time for this," Nathan said, trying to keep his voice calm, though his pulse was pounding in his ears. "I'm not here to fight." The stranger's eyes flickered to the baby in Nathan's arms, and for a brief moment, Nathan thought he saw something like recognition, or perhaps longing, in the stranger's gaze. "A child," the stranger muttered, almost to himself. "A symbol of hope. Or maybe a curse. It's hard to tell anymore." Nathan's heart skipped a beat. What did the stranger mean by that? Was he threatening his child? Before Nathan could react, the stranger took a slow step forward, his knife still raised. "You can keep running, but it won't matter," the man said coldly. "Everyone here is running out of time. You're all living on borrowed time." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nathan's mind was racing, his survival instincts kicking in. He had to make a choice, fight or flee. With a sharp breath, Nathan made up his mind. He turned abruptly, pulling the baby closer to his chest and bolting into the nearest alley. The stranger's voice called after him, but Nathan didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. As he ran, the echoes of the man's words seemed to follow him, haunting him. "You're living on borrowed time." Nathan's feet pounded the cracked asphalt, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind was a blur of frantic thoughts. The stranger's words echoed in his head, growing louder with each step. "You're living on borrowed time." The baby's cries pierced the night air, but Nathan held her tighter, as if the weight of her fragile life could somehow keep him tethered to the world. He couldn't afford to stop, not even for a second. The danger was all around him, creeping in from every shadow. The zone of echoes was no sanctuary. It was a place of death and decay, where even hope seemed like a distant dream. Nathan's body screamed for rest, but he pushed forward, his instincts screaming louder than his exhaustion. There was no time to waste. Every moment felt like a countdown to something terrible, something he couldn't outrun. As he turned another corner, his eyes landed on a dilapidated building up ahead. The structure was worn down, abandoned, yet it offered a temporary refuge. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, something Nathan desperately needed. The baby's cries had subsided, but Nathan knew better than to assume everything was safe. In this world, silence was often more dangerous than sound. He reached the building, ducking into a broken doorway and quickly scanning the interior. The dim light revealed a hollowed-out shell of what had once been a home or perhaps a store. The walls were covered in mold and grime, and shattered glass crunched beneath his boots as he moved further inside. With every step, the baby's tiny whimpers filled the space, a stark contrast to the otherwise eerie silence. Nathan looked down at her, feeling a lump form in his throat. His mind, overwhelmed with grief, couldn't shake the image of Mara, her face, twisted in the throes of infection, the last remnants of her humanity fading away. And now, he was left with only their child. The baby's fragile existence felt like a weight on Nathan's heart. He had promised Mara he would protect her. He had promised her he wouldn't fail. And yet, here he was, with nowhere to go, no clear path ahead. The world was collapsing around him, and his every step seemed to bring him closer to the same fate that had claimed Mara. But then, there was a spark of something deeper than despair. He had the baby. He still had the promise he made to Mara. And that was enough to keep him moving. His heart raced as he carefully made his way to the back of the building, hoping to find a way to secure a temporary refuge. As he reached the rear door, he froze. There was something outside, a movement. His instincts flared, and he pressed his back against the cold, cracked walls, holding his breath. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Too slow to be a threat, but Nathan knew better. The world didn't make sense anymore. The monsters were relentless, and there was no telling what or who was out there. He risked a quick glance through a crack in the wall and saw a silhouette moving past the building. Another survivor? Or something far worse? Nathan's grip tightened on the baby, and he slid down to sit against the wall, his back pressed into the shadows. The silence that followed was deafening. He had no way of knowing if the person, or creature, would find him. But he wasn't about to wait for fate to decide. He had to be the one to take control. With the baby still cradled in his arms, Nathan silently prepared himself for what might come next. There was no room for fear. Fear would get them killed. He had to think clearly. He had to protect her. Moments stretched into what felt like hours. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind through the broken windows, made Nathan's heart pound in his chest. His eyes never left the crack in the wall as the silhouette began to fade into the distance. Whoever or whatever it was, they hadn't noticed him. Nathan let out a slow breath, almost relieved. But it didn't last. The quiet was soon shattered by a deafening crash outside. Something had triggered an alarm, a distant screeching sound, followed by what could only be described as the unmistakable growl of the infected. The figure Nathan had seen earlier emerged from the darkness, running for his life, closely pursued by a small group of the infected. The man didn't stand a chance. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The world around him wasn't just full of danger. It was full of desperation. Everyone was fighting to survive, but survival had become a brutal, unforgiving contest. Trust had become obsolete. The man fell, his screams silenced by the growls of the undead. The infected swarmed over him, and within moments, he was gone. Nathan's instincts screamed at him to run. But there was nowhere to run. The world outside was a wasteland of death, and the enemy was relentless. Survival wasn't just about running anymore, it was about fighting back. Clutching the baby against him, Nathan stood up. The building was no longer a safe haven, it was merely a temporary respite from the horrors of the outside world. He had to get out. He had to find a way to protect his child and give her a future, no matter how slim the chances were. As he moved toward the back exit, the world seemed to close in around him, but Nathan didn't stop. There was no time for hesitation. He would face the world head-on, no matter what it took. For Mara. For his child. For the last shred of hope he had left. The future was uncertain, but Nathan knew one thing for sure: he would fight to protect his child, no matter what horrors lay ahead. Final thoughts. In the ruins of a broken world, Nathan's journey of survival continues. With the loss of Mara, the only thing left to fight for is the future. But in a world overrun by the infected and consumed by fear, can Nathan truly protect the last spark of hope, or will he too fall to the shadows? That concludes Beyond the Infection. Let me know if you'd like to explore other aspects or need more stories.